Today's episode is brought to you by Polyscale. Polyscale is a no-code database edge cache for the world's most demanding data-driven applications. Scaling data-driven applications while maintaining a great user experience is hard. Milliseconds matter, and developers and DBAs have a myriad of technologies to engineer and integrate, involving complex layers of caching, replicas, or even full database migrations, taking too much of your valuable time. Enter Polyscale. Polyscale's edge platform is an AI-driven database cache as a service that takes your current database and scales it infinitely, and with no code and no applications or databases to change. Polyscale intelligently caches data and queries compute closer to the user, providing extremely low latency database reads from anywhere in the world, improving application performance and decreasing costs. It takes just minutes to set up and is truly plug and play. Check out Polyscale's global edge data platform, www.polyscale.ai, and sign up for a free account today.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. By the time you're listening to this, it will most likely, no matter where you are, be the first day of spring, or at least the first day of spring in the northern hemisphere. I think it's probably first day of fall in the southern hemisphere. I think I got that right. But anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Spring is here, which means, as I mentioned a few times, the pollen is here. My eyes are watering. I probably sound very, very nasally. I apologize for that, but it's about a month to 6 weeks where it's a lot of head congestion. So I apologize to all of you who are listening to this and going, "Come on, dude, clean it out, clean out the pipes." Anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Another Sunday Perspectives, or as a few folks have come to call this, sort of a Sunday monologue. I don't really love the idea that it's a monologue. I like to think of it as a little bit of perspective, but I guess since I'm the only one talking, it is technically a monologue. As I mentioned on this, usually the Sunday Perspectives end up sort of falling into two buckets. I've found they weren't intentionally this way, but they sort of seem to have kind of fall into these two buckets. One of them is, some perspective on some sort of technology, right? A historical perspective, where things are going, some things like that. And then the other ones seem to fall into some sort of kind of perspective on, jobs and careers and things you can do to improve yourself and so on and so forth. So this one, I'm going to start off with a story, and then in the second half, I'll kind of explain where the perspective comes from. So, I'm like a lot of you. I listen to quite a few different podcasts, lots of different interests. And I was listening to one a couple of weeks ago, and it was with Conan O'Brien, who, for those of you who are old enough, Conan O'Brien, comedian, wrote for Saturday Night Live, is a writer for The Simpsons, hosted his own late night talk show, ended up running the Tonight Show, eventually, had some issues on there with Jay Leno, and eventually went on to then run his own talk show again. But one of the really good comedians, or at least somebody that I enjoy. And he hosts his own podcast, and he does one where, oftentimes he's talking to celebrities. And he had sort of an interesting anecdote. He was talking to Slash, the lead guitar player from Guns N' Roses. And again, for those of you from a certain age, you'll know who that is. If you don't, if you're all into rock and roll, go look up Guns N' Roses and Slash, quite a character. Anyways, they were talking about when Slash had decided to pick up playing guitar. And he got to talking, and he said, well, I think he said he was 14 or 15 years old. So he wasn't sort of a child prodigy. He wasn't somebody who, his parents had sort of, put a guitar in his hand when he was 3. And he said, I was listening to some sort of music and, got into it and sort of started learning to play. And so he started learning to play at a slightly later age. Maybe he was, more of a teenager. And Conan made an interesting comment, and he said, I was never a musician growing up. And he said, I went through college and I sort of watched, different people, pick up guitar and sort of try and play a little bit. And he never really did it. And he said he got to be about 26 or 28 years old. And he sort of told himself, he said, I think maybe I'm a little too old to be able to ever do that. I don't think I can ever do that. I'm kind of wrapped up in my career, and, I don't necessarily feel like, I have sort of the musical instinct in me. And he said, I don't know if I can ever do that. And then he proceeded to go on and sort of tell this story about how, some people would come on the show, and occasionally they would, the band would come on the show, or somebody would come on the show, or they'd be backstage, and he just started playing around with somebody's guitar and sort of learning to strum a few chords, and he, learned a few key finger placements, and, eventually went on to become a reasonably enough decent guitar player, to the point where he wasn't in any sort of band. He wasn't trying to impress anybody, but he did end up incorporating it into some of his live shows. And it got me thinking about, there are times in your life when you think, well, I'm sort of the die is set, as often said, like, what you're going to be is what you're going to be. And I thought what I would do in the second half of the show is I have a fairly significant birthday coming up this next week, one that ends in a 0. And that's one of those birthdays that makes you sort of have some perspective on things and then think about things a little bit. So what I'm try and do here after the break is talk a little bit about a couple of instances when I went through that thing where I went, no, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that, and sort of talk through them, because I think it's, as I've gotten to meet a lot of people, as a lot of we had our 600th show this past week, which is amazing, which means we've met, roughly 600 people, and we've probably met hundreds more, having been on the road and done lots of interesting things in this industry. But, there's been a few interesting points in my life where I said, no, I would love to be able to do that, but I don't think I can do that. And I kind of want to walk through some of the thought process that goes into that. And maybe it'll be something that, you can relate to as you're thinking about your career, as far as what you do, what you prioritize. And I'll get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by BMC. And BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? The A game is when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/agame. That's bmc.com/agame. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I thought what I would do, mostly because, as I always try and connect the dots between at least a couple things that have me thinking the last week or two. I've got this birthday coming up. It is one of those birthdays that, gives you some perspective on life, make you think about where you are, where you've been, and where you want to go. And also that sort of little anecdote on the Conan show with Slash. And it got me sort of thinking about the moments in my career, especially as I've kind of transitioned from various stages of my career. When I had sort of those moments where I literally remember telling myself, like, I don't think I could ever do that. And, the very first time that it happened to me, so, by way of background, and I don't know if I've ever really gone into this, my background, in school had nothing to do with computers. In fact, I never really dealt with computers all that much in college. A little bit, some word processing stuff. Again, it dates myself. But, computers were never really a thing. I was more of a finance and econ major. And for whatever reason, when I was getting out of school, the internet was just starting to explode. Yahoo was not yet a thing. Google was not yet a thing. And for whatever reason, through some connections of people I knew, I ended up in the technology industry. And part of it was, I think it was just because I didn't want to go do cold calling on Wall Street. Part of it was, it was this sort of thing that was taking off, and it was very competitive. And for me, that sort of scratched an itch. And so my first job actually was in sales, which was very weird because by all measures, Myers-Briggs and all those sort of things, like, I'm not a overly extroverted person. I'm probably sort of right on the line between being introverted and extroverted. And so I started doing this sales job, and part of the job was, we'd go off and we'd talk to different companies and we'd talk about technology, and obviously we were trying to sell them stuff. But, there was constantly sort of, people would ask you questions. Hey, does this technology do this? Does it work with this? Blah, blah, blah. And we had this thing where we could basically, if we ran into technical problems, we could call somebody and say, hey, whoever it was, hey, this is the customer's question. Does the technology do this? Or how would they solve this problem? And I remember one of the people that I talked to all the time, and I apologize for forgetting his name. That's one of my great weaknesses is remembering people's names. But I remember talking to him all the time and thinking, man, this guy is the smartest person I know. He knows the answer to every question. And, however he did that, however he faked it, however he looked it up in books, he came across as just the smartest person all the time, nicest person in the world. And he was doing, more or less sort of tech support, if you will. And I remember talking to my manager at the time, and she was asking me what I wanted to do. And I thought, and I told her, I said, I like the technology. It's pretty interesting to me. It's a lot of learning new stuff. And I said, but I think I'm probably stuck doing sales forever, because to be technical, I'd have to be as smart as the guy on the other end of the phone. Let's call him Mike, because I can't remember his name. And I said, but I'll never be able to get there, because I will never be that smart in technology. I'll never be able to figure those things out. And I remember her saying, like, how old are you? And I think I was 22, 23 at the time. She said, you have no idea how much you can learn in a given period of time if you put your mind to it. And, I was a little skeptical at the time because, I didn't have a whole lot of technology experience. I didn't know what all there was to learn. But I remember every single day there'd be a bunch of magazines that would show up. And this was back when there were tech magazines. So again, I'm dating myself. And I would just take them all. I'd take them all out of the mailroom and I would go and read them all and I would dig through them all and I'd read them at night. And then the next day I would come in and I'd have a whole bunch of things written down. I had sort of yellow markered, sort of highlighted a bunch of things and I asked a whole bunch of questions. And I would go talk to my technical people and I'd go, hey, what does this mean? How does this work? And it was the first time in my life when I really, maybe today we'd call it imposter syndrome, but then it really wasn't sort of imposter syndrome. It was just like, I don't know what I don't know. But it was a really good kind of learning experience of being like, oh, okay, this is possible. You have to sort of take the first step, right? You have to dip your toe into it and you have to be really committed to whatever it was. And so for me at the time, it was trying to figure out enough technologies. And anyways, long story short, went on to have a number of jobs that were actually, hands-on technology, involved with a lot of things. And then at some point, I'd done technology for 3 or 4 years. I'd gotten some certifications, was working at Cisco at the time, was a CCIE, and thought I knew some stuff, and was dealing with technology literally every day to the point where, I felt like my identity at that point was, how much technology do you know? And if you don't know it, you're sort of a flaw, but it gives you an opportunity to go learn it. But your identity at that point was you need to know everything about every technology. And again, it was a small sample size because Cisco only did so many things. But I remember I had an opportunity at some point. I had said, well, maybe I want to move back to my home state. I was living in North Carolina. Maybe I'll move back to my home state of Michigan. And an opportunity came up. But the opportunity was sort of half business oriented and half technology oriented. And I remember thinking, if I ever take that job and I'm not doing technology every single day and I don't know the answer to every single question, how in the world am I going to be valuable to these people, right? They've reached out to me because, in my mind, I thought, well, they think you're really technical. So that's the value that you provide. And I remember having one of those second moments where I thought, boy, if I'm not doing technology every day, if I'm not living with it hands-on every single day, how in the world am I going to provide any value? And it was a great fear. It was this is my identity. I'm going to lose my identity. And again, maybe it was a, sort of imposter syndrome moment. I didn't even know the word at the time. But it was another one of those moments where, I ended up making a decision. I ended up taking a role, not that role. I stayed in North Carolina, but another role that was, sort of half technical, half business oriented. And, it was a time of sort of like, what am I getting myself into? I don't know enough about this other stuff. I don't know how you blend these things together. I don't know how you take, one skill and combine it with another skill that on the surface don't seem like they necessarily go together. And, ended up doing that for a few years, found a lot of happiness in doing it, found that the business side for me and even some of the communication stuff for me, which, going back a few years was a weakness, had sort of evolved and had become something that I enjoyed, something that, I was better than the technical side of stuff. And the point of me going through all this stuff is not to give you a history lesson or to, kind of walk back through my career, but to sort of highlight that, there's going to be moments in time in your career. And again, my career has been a lot of times on the vendor side of things, what we'd call the vendor side of things, the people that make technology and sell technology, but you could be anywhere in the industry that you're going to kind of challenge yourself. You're going to say, I really admire that person. I admire those kind of people or that kind of role, or, I think there's an opportunity to do something different. And you're going to reach a point where you go, boy, what is my identity? What is my value? And you're going to have to make a decision, right? Am I willing to take a risk? Am I even able to do that stuff? And so I think back about that in the same context that Conan sort of said, like, I never thought I could do that because they had looked at somebody who was really, really good at it and had done it for years and years. And they thought, well, I'd like to get to there, but I feel like I've started too late. And, I think, at least for me in particular, and I can think of a lot of different people, I'll give you some names of people to go look up, but, there's really almost never a time in your career, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, where it's too late to say, if I really want to go do something, to go do it. And we talk all the time on the show about, going to training and learning new things and stuff. But sometimes it's just a matter of being like, I want to try something on the side, right? I'm really admire what somebody else does. I think that seems really interesting. And I'll just from myself speaking from experience, and trust me, I've got as many failures as I've got successes in this career, in this life. You look back on it and you go, it's never too late. It might take you a year. It might take you 2 years. It might take you 3 years to get to a level, and sometimes even more than that, to where you aspired to. But the process, which you figure out over time, is the process is so much more interesting sometimes than the end goal. And, it's just sort of like this podcast that you all listen to. Like, we got started, and I don't know that we necessarily had any people we were really looking up to. We just thought it was an interesting idea. We've watched a lot of people over the years get really good at it, and we've sort of aspired to be as good as that. But, the process, how we've gotten from where we were when we first started to where we are today, and, I think we're okay at it. I don't think we're great at it. But the process has been really interesting. It's been really rewarding. It's been, we've gone through some failures. We've gone through some, tough times of figuring out, like, how do we make something better? We're not delivering what we want to do. We're not happy with what we're doing. And I think that process is really interesting. And I think maybe my own ignorance or unawareness of, concepts like imposter syndrome, maybe been a good thing for me, right? Like, not necessarily knowing that I should be concerned about it. I've made plenty of dumb decisions. I've gone into plenty of things sort of like eyes wide open and sometimes eyes wide shut. But, I'd highly encourage, if you do reach those moments where you're like, man, I really wish I could do that thing, or I'd like to aspire to do that thing. And you have that moment where you go, I don't think I could do that. I think I'm too far behind, or I just don't think I could do that. Take a chance. I've always found success or failure, it's always worth the process. You're going to meet a lot of interesting people. And I think back to at least two interesting people I can immediately think of, that we've met over our career. I think we've had them on the show, at least one of them, probably both of them. One of them is Ashley McNamara, who a lot of you know as, running a really awesome engineering team and DevRel team over at Microsoft. One of the most outgoing people on Twitter and social media, one of the nicest people you're going to meet in the industry. When I met her, she was a photographer. She didn't write any code. She was a photographer. In fact, I knew her spouse at the time, and she used to come to events, and she was always super nice, and she was taking pictures, and she was a very, very good photographer. And somewhere in that process, she had to teach herself a little bit of code, basically to help her to do her photography business. And then she kept doing code, and she kept coming to events, and she kept meeting people, and she kept being nice. And now she's somebody who, writes really good tutorials and programs about how to get people into coding. She leads teams of like world-class developers and DevRel people. And, she did all that in a short period of time, relatively short period of time, and did it having no idea where the outcome was. So she's somebody, we've always sort of looked up to and said, that was a pretty brave, bold, journey that she took. Now, another person I can think of is a guy named Tal Klein, who we got to know a long time ago. Was one of the early people that's been on the Cloudcast. And Tal was a technical person. I think when we first met him, he eventually got into marketing. Has been with a couple of different interesting startups, and at some point he just decided, I want to write. I have this creative mind. I want to write. And he's written, renowned, recognized, and award-winning sci-fi books. And in fact, I think one of his books has been turned into a movie. And that's one of those things that, again, you may not completely change your career. You may not completely change everything about what you do, but you may be able to find that some combination of this new thing that you like to do and maybe what you also have as a foundational background are pretty interesting combination, right? It's, it's sort of like, when you have two types of food get mashed together, like Asian fusion or Tex-Mex or whatever, sort of combinations are out there. So, there are plenty of people out there. I highly encourage it. And it is, it's one of those things that as I sit here and ponder on this, milestone birthday, if you will, some of those moments are really interesting. You think back on them and you're like, yeah, that was a tough choice. It was a difficult decision. Glad it turned out, or at least it turned and steered me in a good direction. And, I feel like, it's something that all of you probably have in you. You just don't always know who to turn to, who to ask questions to. So if you're ever in that situation, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to chat about it. If there's, if you want us to introduce you to somebody who you aspire to, I know we're lucky enough to get to talk to a lot of smart people. Let us know. We're happy to make introductions. We find that most of the people that come on the show are really, really generous with their time and are people that want to help because somebody helped them along the line. Somebody paid it forward for them as well. So if we can do that, or if we can help you in any way, let us know. Again, for me, this is, Sunday Perspective, Sunday Monologue Show. I guess it's me trying to connect the dots between, that one little comment from Conan and having a birthday that puts some things in perspective for me. And hopefully some of these stories were useful. Hopefully you all are having a good spring, getting a kickoff to the spring. And last thing, unfortunately, the things going on in the Ukraine are still going on. It's very, very sad, especially some of the pictures are just gut-wrenching. And unfortunately, the people who used to listen to the show, at least numbers-wise, aren't listening. And again, we hope that they're safe. We hope that, they're focused on the most important things. And again, hopefully, at some point when listening to a podcast is some sort of priority in their life, hopefully they'll be back. And we can only pray and make donations and do other things. So our thoughts are out to those folks, and hopefully if you have a chance to help out in any sort of way, that would be great. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for always listening to the podcast. Like we mentioned, let us know how many you've listened to. If you started listening at 100 or 50 or 400 or 500, we'd just love to know. We'd love to know what your journey's been with us, because it's been a pretty amazing journey. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.